and welcome to Love, Light, and Healing with Colette Lopane Capella. I am Colette Lopane Capella, a licensed mental health counselor, Reiki practitioner, EMDR therapist, and healer. I am founder and director of New Day Vitality, located in Larchmont, New York, where we provide a holistic, alternative approach to psychotherapy and counseling. We offer individual, couples, group, and family therapy, as well as Reiki energy healing and EMDR therapy. I'm excited to have this opportunity to bring this show to the public and the beautiful community of Larchmont and Mamaroneck. A little bit about me: I'm a wife, a fur mommy, an entrepreneur, and a true healer at heart. I've been practicing for many years and have had the profound honor of being a part of so many beautiful journeys to wellness and helping individuals live and be the best versions of themselves, mind, body, and spirit. This show is to bring together the mind, body, and spirit through love and light, wellness, and healing. This show will be informative, helpful, and fun. So sit back and relax and enjoy all the beauty this show will offer you. Each episode, we will bring on an expert guest to discuss important different topics that bridge the mind, body, and spirit, and the beauty of when it's all tied in together. Experts will vary from energy healers, teachers, nurses, crystal healers, psychiatrists, doctors, therapists, psychologists, psychics, mediums, yogis, and all healers or light workers, as I like to call us. On today's episode, so excited, we have my dear friend, Narcisa Sierra, licensed mental health counselor, trauma therapist. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a part of this show. I'm excited and honored to have you a part of this amazing opportunity and wellness to our viewers.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited for you to be here. So first question, we're going to dive right in.
Okay.
It's okay.
All right, we can dive.
Okay. So tell the audience a little bit who you are, and what you do.
Right now, I am in private practice. I'm a psychotherapist. My practice is called Footsteps to Wellness, and I've been in private practice for about 3 years or so. Before that, I did a lot of agency work, working in mental health clinics and substance abuse treatment centers, and also work with alternative to incarceration programs.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, which was amazing with disenfranchised populations and just like amazing work. So
wow.
Yeah.
And do you love being in private practice?
I adore it. I do. I do.
It's good, right? It's the best.
It is. It is. You get to meet so many different people from all walks of life, and I feel like my clients, like, they teach me about the human spirit in the world. Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's like you learn something new.
Yeah.
Always evolving. I love that. So we actually answered the second question already. So the next question is, I know you're an expert also in trauma. So let's talk a little bit about trauma. I know that we kind of all have our definitions for it, or what the audience might think it, but how do you define trauma?
Personally, I define trauma as a psychologically distressing event. One that is usually where your sense of safety is threatened, your sense of the way that you view the world is altered. And what's traumatic for one person, it's subjective, it varies. So what may be traumatic for me and for you may be very different things, but it's the impact that it leaves on someone, which is often, it takes over the course of their life, and it comes back in many different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And what type of trauma do you usually see or treat in your private practice?
For the most part, I work with individuals with a history of childhood trauma.
Okay.
So that looks like childhood abuse, sexual abuse, maybe witnessing violence in the home. And it also encompasses emotional neglect, and abandonment, like really heavy stuff. But I also see individuals who have suffered from more recent traumas, which could be anything from a sexual assault or the loss of a family member. It really varies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult work.
Yeah, it is, but it's also, in a way, when I work with people and I get to see them grow and heal and kind of find their power back, it can be empowering. And I think it could be really, it's just, as a clinician, it could be very rewarding to see that, the growth in the individual.
Yeah. I had to ask you that because I knew you had a really good response to that. So what's your approach to trauma? I often use EMDR, so I'm trained to use EMDR with trauma, but what's your approach like?
Well, I tend to utilize talk therapy, and I think EMDR is great. I think with trauma, most people need a combination of therapeutic approaches, but I tend to utilize more of a talk therapy approach, which is like narrative, like finding out the story, which we don't necessarily need to get into the story to make, progress, but examining like the thoughts and the feelings underneath, because a lot of time when we experience a traumatic experience, there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, and kind of understanding that, and also like one's view of the world. So trying to help someone understand like the narrative behind maybe some of the things that happen to them, and seeing how it impacts their life. So like a more global perspective.
Sure,
yeah,
that makes sense. I think, and also by doing that, you're giving them a voice, right? They feel heard, right? They feel like they're being acknowledged.
Yeah, I think there's such a power in having someone bear witness to your story.
Yeah, sacred.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially in terms of validation, because so many times, and I think this is just for us as human beings, like we need to be validated, to be heard, to be understood, and I think it's so important to have someone bear witness to that and see you and hear you and say, yes, okay, that happened,
so significant.
Yeah.
I just thought of it last night. Did you watch the Grammys?
Part of it, yeah.
Did you see Lady Gaga?
Yes.
Okay, and her statement about mental health?
Yes.
And as soon as you said that, it reminded me of what she said. How she said something like, it takes a lot of bravery to be able to go deep down inside to bring up this story, but also it's safe to bring someone into, I think she said something like, to take someone into your mind,
into
take
your
them
head.
with you, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was so powerful, and like literally what you're talking about right now, I think kind of mirrors her statement that I found so profound.
Yeah.
So beautiful. When
I
she
clapped
said
at the screen. I
did.
did.
It was hysterical.
Yeah.
You know me. Hysterical.
Yeah.
Yes, we need this. Yes. But I think a lot of that too goes back to feeling comfortable and confident being in this room with a therapist, sharing your story, feeling acknowledged, feeling heard.
Yeah.
How big that is.
It's so huge, and I think it's so important to find, when you're looking for a therapist, like that right match.
Oh, of course.
You have to feel comfortable, but, and that's like one of my main goals. We can talk, it's not always about the trauma too, like we talk about other stuff, like your successes and all sorts of things, but the fact that I want to create this environment that is safe and that it's not judgmental. Yep. Anything goes, and you can just kind of feel like, I want people to feel like they can be themselves. It's important to me.
And you have that ability. You have it innately.
Thank you.
To make someone just feel like they could just be.
Thank
not
you.
feel judged or feel like they're being, put on some kind of stage like this. Right?
Right.
They could just be themselves, and you have that innate ability about yourself.
Oh, thank you. You do too.
You do.
No, you.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about childhood trauma. I know that you said a lot of your patients come in with some kind of childhood trauma. How do you define it, and what's the treatment approach like when we're talking about more particularly like childhood trauma versus like complex trauma or something like that?
Yeah, well, with childhood trauma, like a lot of times that can look like repeated traumas over time, right? It's not necessarily like one event that happened, and within the definition of trauma, it can be something that was experienced or something that was witnessed. And as I mentioned before, it can be anything from sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, but I think one of the unique things about childhood trauma is that it encompasses how the individual, the child, begins to view the world, right? Because let's say you're like 5 or 7 and certain bad things happen, the way you perceive them a lot of times is, that was my fault. I shouldn't have done that. And because children are very egocentric, right? So like they kind of see the world like just through their eyes. So that carries over into adulthood. And it's important, I think, just to sometimes go back a little bit and understand these events from like that inner child like perspective and what needs weren't met. But
that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like what needs weren't met, or what emotional components were not fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly.
Through childhood,
Yeah.
And how does a person, or how does trauma affect a person And well, I guess so. Hold on. Let me rephrase this question. How does trauma affect a person? Because I think that, I guess the question would be like everybody's kind of affected differently.
Right.
But how would we kind of, if we use sort of more of a broad statement, how does trauma affect someone from childhood to today? Like what kind of barriers are put up for them in adulthood, let's just say?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest things that I see in the work that I do is the ability to establish healthy and safe relationships.
Yeah.
That's a big one. And a lot of times it looks like intimacy issues with trust. Especially like if you grew up in an environment where you really couldn't trust your caregivers, you're gonna have a hard time trusting your intimate partners, friends, and a lot of times there's this wall that's created. So a lot of times when I see people who are seeking therapy, it's actually not to address the trauma. You know, it's about the problems that they're having interpersonally.
Exactly.
Right?
So, but it goes back to...
And a lot of times it goes back to that. Like a lot of times, like we're not aware of all those things. And so it, you know, through conversation, it kind of comes to light. So the biggest thing that I can say from the childhood trauma is the ability to form healthy attachments.
Yeah.
And whether that looks like maybe someone with intimacy issues, having a hard time letting someone in emotionally, or also like having maybe poor boundaries or letting the wrong people kind of in.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then they're continuously hurt, right? Or they're continuously
Yeah.
let down or
Exactly.
left feeling a certain negative way.
Yeah, reenacting certain patterns.
Yes.
And, you know, everyone has different theoretical viewpoints, but I do believe that we repeat our past sometimes to try to heal it unconsciously. So
Well, we can think about past lives, right? So like the theory with that is like a lot of times a past life, something occurred, something happened, and you come back to this life to kind of change or fix or go a different path versus the mistake that might have happened in the past to create a new life.
Yeah, that's
a new
a good
story.
way. Yeah, I never even thought about that connection, but yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I use it all the time.
Huh.
The spiritual side of me.
Yeah.
Then I'll talk about like the past life connection.
Yeah.
Like, so if there's like, so sometimes someone will come in and present something and they're trying to find a trigger, right? Everybody always wants to know, like, what's the trigger? And sometimes there's no identifiable trigger.
Yeah.
So sometimes they'll say, do you think this has anything to do with a past life? And some people are like, wait, what do you mean? Other people are like, oh, God, here she goes. Right? What do you mean? But it's like our body has memory, our muscle has, but so do our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's some kind of memory there where something happened in the past. Think of like past life regressions, right?
Yeah.
That affects your current state.
That makes a lot of sense. And karma.
Yes,
you know? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so a big thing connected with trauma is PTSD.
Yes.
So can we define PTSD? Well, how do you define PTSD?
Well, looking at it as a cluster of symptoms that occurs, basically difficulty with the past memories coming into the present. So symptoms can look like nightmares, flashbacks, essentially re-experiencing the things that have happened. Essentially PTSD, it changes the brain and the nervous system. So having these responses, flashbacks, these can occur out of nowhere.
Exactly.
So it also encompasses avoiding triggers, avoiding things that remind you of the bad things that have happened. Often difficulties with regulating one's emotions.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's like extreme highs or extreme lows sometimes.
It can be like extreme anger, and it can also be like numbing, completely disassociating and shutting off.
Yep.
And that's a big one too that a lot of people have problems with or seek treatment for, because why can I not connect? It's almost like a lot of people describe it to me as like there's this wall, like a glass, and they can't quite, like they know, right, that there's an issue, but they just don't know how to like move through it.
Yeah, they feel stuck.
Yeah.
It's interesting, when I started doing the training for EMDR, you were talking about how like sometimes there's like a triggered environment or something, right? And they're not sure where it's connected. And EMDR is really interesting because you kind of like float back. So you're going back in time a little bit, and sometimes people will come up with this memory that they totally, well, maybe subconsciously forgot about, right? So if somebody has like this intense fear of the water, right, or the ocean, and they're like, they have no idea why, but they don't swim, and parents don't know about anything that's happened, and you start doing the EMDR, and you get back to like this memory where someone might say like, oh my God, I remember when I was 5 years old, my neighbor Joe Smith was in the pool with me, and I remember him dunking my head and feeling terrified, and it was just so traumatizing. And And that's one of the cool things about EMDR. It's like, so sometimes there is an identifiable trigger when you go back like that, and then the person's like, Colette, I had no idea.
Wow.
I don't even remember. And they bring it to their mom. The mom's like, oh yeah, that did happen.
Right.
Well, that's why I'm terrified of the water, right? Or I can't swim. So I think it's really interesting. And there's so many different amazing approaches, but EMDR is kind of fun in the way that can kind of bring you back to something that you totally just dug deep and forgot about.
The mind is a funny thing. Like it's an amazing thing, but it's amazing how all these memories can just like resurface. Yeah.
So powerful. Okay, let's talk about emotional trauma, physical trauma, and mental trauma. What's the difference between emotional trauma, physical trauma, which we know, and mental trauma?
Right,
pretty close. But how would you describe the three?
Well, I guess with emotional trauma, I would look at that more as in terms of your emotional needs not being met.
Okay.
Right. So that can look anything like abandonment issues, and sometimes these are emotional abandonments. You can have caregivers who are very present physically, but are not emotionally attuned to you and not able to kind of meet your needs. So there can be an emotional trauma in that someone can have abandonment issues. So fast forward to intimate relationships, makes things really difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah. As far as mental trauma, I look at that more as like verbal abuse.
That's what I think of, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, shaming, humiliation, those kind of things. And that leaves a lasting impact also, because then what happens is, you know, usually the person will absorb that dialogue and it plays in their own head.
Yep, all the time. And it's kind of like they think it's like their inner dialogue, their inner speech.
Right.
And themselves saying these things to themselves, like they believe it.
Right. So oftentimes I ask my clients, like, well, whose voice is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's funny. I do that too.
Yeah.
Whose voice is that? Who said that? Is that your voice? Is that somebody from the past? Yes.
Yeah, and just even acknowledging like, oh, that was so-and-so.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
And how about physical trauma?
Well, I look at that as any sort of physical abuse, which unfortunately a lot of people have experienced. And in this day and age, and things have changed, but you know, generations ago, there were certain forms of corporal punishment that were actually more accepted. And you know, like I said, different people have different responses. So,
you know, it's funny. Well, not funny, but it's interesting. What I think of when you were giving the definition of like emotional trauma, right? And how like a parent can be very present, right? But emotionally they weren't present. I often think of, have you ever read The 5 Love Languages?
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
You see, it's funny. So sometimes I think of that because everybody sort of understands love in a different way based on this book, right? So somebody might have love as physical touch or gift giving, and the person giving it and the person taking it also understands it differently.
Yeah.
So it's interesting sometimes, especially when you have like a couple or something, right? And one person understands love as like the physical touch and the hand, and the other one sees it as gift giving.
Right.
And so the person's like, I bought you this, this, and this, and then I still don't feel loved.
Right.
Because they don't see love as that definition of love. It's more of the physical touch or the quality time. So it's interesting, a lot of times when I think of like the emotional trauma too, you're right, the parent could have been completely 110% present, but they weren't giving that emotional capacity that individual needed. Now, that could also be a sense of neglect, right? But sometimes it's maybe the capacity that person had or understood the love.
Exactly. Like it's not always like this malicious intent.
Exactly.
It's not.
That's why I like how you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really individual in particular, right?
Yes.
And you know how, like you just said, like what one person's needs are. And like I think in a line of work, we tend to give, especially in our relationships, the way that we like to receive.
Yep.
So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like how you said that. Okay, so some individuals who have been exposed to childhood trauma have a difficult time with healthy boundaries as an adult. Can we talk a little bit about boundaries, how we define them, and how we practice them?
Sure, I love boundaries.
Me too.
Yeah, very, very important.
It's funny, I always, somehow, some way, whether it's trauma or anxiety or depressive like symptoms, boundaries always comes into play.
Yes,
Right?
I think just in life,
Yes,
boundaries, yes,
yes.
very important. I essentially just define boundaries as it's like a line in the sand, like what's okay and what's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, people who have histories of trauma, I mean, your boundaries many times were violated.
Yes,
Right? So how are you supposed to know what healthy boundaries are?
Exactly.
Right? So I see a lot of people who maybe are in relationships where it's not reciprocal. There's a lot of maybe giving
Yep.
and taking. It's not balanced.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And so how would you even start to teach someone healthy boundaries? Like, where do you even begin?
Well, a lot of times people who struggle with boundaries, they don't know boundaries within themselves, like what they like, what they don't like.
Perfect,
So
yeah.
we have to start there. And I'll hear, well, Narcisa, I don't even know what I like. Okay, well, let's start with what you don't like. Most people have a sense in what you don't like, even in your body. Where do you feel? When do you feel uncomfortable?
Yep.
Okay. And then exploring these situations. And if you start with what you don't like, then we can move to the opposite. Like, okay, so maybe you don't want a relationship where someone just pops over whenever they want. Maybe you want a little more advanced notice.
Yeah.
So starting kind of there.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's really, I think that's neat how you do that. It's kind of like working the other way around.
Yeah.
But someone might be easier, it might be simpler for someone to kind of identify what they don't like versus what
Yes.
they need or what they like.
Exactly. It's
Initially.
hard. Yeah, it's hard for people to identify like what they like, and especially if your power has been taken away, it's hard to step into that and be like, no, this is what I like. This is what's okay with me.
Yeah.
And especially if there's a narrative, and not all the times, but if there's an underlying narrative that I can only keep this relationship if I do this, or issues with worthiness and shame,
Yep.
then yeah.
Exactly. I think it's very profound too, because it's got to be empowering the steps to take of what do you not like, and then get to the place where
Yeah.
what do you like, what's acceptable for you.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
really growing within that person. I mean, they're feeling that sense of
Yeah.
strength and a voice again.
Yeah, but also with that, which it's because most of my clients are not like, oh yeah, well that's it, we're done. There's so much guilt that comes up.
Yes.
So the work
Yep.
involves really learning how to tolerate the guilt and all the
Yeah.
other feelings that come up once you start asserting yourself and
Exactly.
establishing like what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah, because then it's like I feel bad, or I could have,
Yes.
should have, would have done this, and
Yes.
well, you shouldn't feel. I think a lot of times when I tell people it's okay to say no, they're like, that's so selfish, right? I could do it, and saying no, and I'm like, it's selfish. It's self-care.
absolutely.
Like, that's literally what it is. It's okay to say no. You don't have to say yes to everything, right? You don't have to.
Yep.
Doesn't make you a better person because someone asks you to do something. You do it all the time. Who's going to take care of you then?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I tell my clients. It's
Yeah.
not selfish, it's self-care.
Yes.
And I do a lot of work to try to understand, okay, well, what's driving that behavior? You
Yeah.
know, like, 'cause-
What's the incentive behind this?
yeah, because when we get to that, then that'll kind of like fade away.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about trauma, and what would the advice be that if someone's been exposed to trauma, right? Let's just say recent trauma. What would be the advice? Where would they start? What would they do? Just something traumatic happens to them.
Right.
It's really crippling them in many ways in their life and their work and their relationships. Where would somebody start? What would somebody do? What would be the advice be for you?
Well, I don't necessarily think that someone might be ready for therapy just yet. So I think trying to find support through a trusted peer, spiritual advisor, mentor, someone that you feel that you can kind of just be and be authentic
Yes.
with. I feel like that's a good place to start if
Yep.
one is not ready for therapy just yet.
Yep.
And to kind of get that message, you don't have to sit with this all alone.
That's what I was going to say. I think that's the biggest, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're not alone.
You're not alone.
There's someone out there, right? There's whether you're right, like whether it's a Reiki practitioner or a
Right.
therapist or a pastor or a priest, whatever it is.
Right.
There's someone out there who wants to hear your story
Yeah.
and wants to put their hand out and hold it and say,
Yeah.
I'm here for you. I'm here to listen.
Exactly.
I want to help. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to, you don't necessarily have to share your story,
That's true.
Sometimes you just need someone to sit with you, like, I'm not feeling okay right now.
Yeah.
And that's it, yeah.
And how good that must feel.
Yeah.
To just be present with someone.
Yeah, with someone who's able to just be present with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to ask you my heavy duty loaded question that I ask
okay.
everybody at the end. You
Right.
got this. If there was one piece of advice that you could give this generation, what would it be?
Love yourself. Don't be afraid to take a look inward and get to know yourself and all the good, all the bad. And there's a strength and power in that. So don't be afraid to get to know yourself.
I love that. That's a really good one. And just for the audience's knowledge, how would someone get in touch with you? What's the best way to contact you?
Oh, you can reach out to me through my website, footsteps-wellness.org.
Okay.
Yeah, or feel free to give me a call. What is my number? 914-295-0431.
Perfect, perfect. I was going to say,
Yeah.
well, I have like 3 numbers of yours, so I don't know.
I got a lot of numbers.
There's a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're actually going to have another episode after this. Because we're so good here. So I want to thank you so much for being a part of today's episode. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm sure the viewers do as well. So informative. And thank you to our beautiful audience. We're privileged and honored to have you a part of today's show. And my famous, famous line, you've probably seen it in my show. Until next time.
Okay, maybe I haven't. Yeah.
Okay. We've got to put our hands together. Until next time, love, light, and healing.
Love, light, and healing.
And then
Namaste.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.